Before understanding what exactly is Firebase, it is really important that you understand what exactly are dynamic apps. You already know what apps are, they just run on your phone. But apps don't really run in isolation. They are making contact with some sort of a server or a cloud, which is a fancy name for a server. And the cloud or the server is going to return you some sort of a data. Hopefully, this data is in the form of JSON, and using that data, the app can refresh and the app can display different things, like maybe annotations on the map. Or maybe even a grocery list with some shopping list and the grocery items. Or more complicated apps can also display the chat interface with text messaging as well as photos. So these are the dynamic apps, apps that can be updated remotely and apps that don't really require a new version of the iOS or Android apps to be pushed out to the App Store to be updated. They communicate with the server, gets the JSON or some sort of a protocol from the server, usually in the form of JSON, and update the data and the content. Now, we've already described that app is going to communicate with the cloud, with the server, but the question is, well, how do we get to that server, or what is that server even implemented in? What technologies it is using? And now we come to the question of technologies, languages, and frameworks because there are so many different ways in implementing the server. Some of the technologies that you might already have heard of include ASP.NET, which is from Microsoft, and it allows you to build web applications that can be run on the server side, and it also allows you to create web APIs that can return JSON or XML and which can be consumed by iOS or Android applications. There's also Node.js, which uses JavaScript, very popular framework for writing JavaScript on the server. We also have heard of Ruby on Rails, which uses the Ruby language to create dynamic websites and also dynamic APIs. If you're using Python, then you might be interested in Django, which is a server-side framework using Python. You can even create server-side applications or server-side APIs using server-side Swift, and there are different frameworks available. Most famous ones are Vapor, Kitura, there's Perfect, and so on. Now, all of these technologies and frameworks do exist and many more. The only thing is that you have to know this to implement the server-side frameworks. So you have to know, if you're using ASP.NET, you have to know C# or VB.NET. If you're using Node.js, then you have to know JavaScript. If you're using Ruby on Rails, then you obviously have to know Ruby. If you're using Django, then you have to know Python to write the server-side code. And then again, you have to write it all by yourself. You have to create the database, you have to write those functions, those methods, those routes that returns appropriate data, and you have to work with the notification, you have to work with refreshing the data, fetching the data, inserting the data. All of the code associated with your server side, you have to write it yourself. If you're working in a small company, maybe you don't have those capabilities. Maybe you have only few people who are well versed in iOS or Android development, and they don't know how to create these server-side backends. And for that, there is a service called Backend as a Service, BaaS, and basically a BaaS or a Backend as a Service provides you with all the necessary tools that you can use to quickly create a service that can be exposed on the internet, and it can return you appropriate data in the form of JSON, which can be consumed by your iOS or Android application. And Firebase is such a service. Firebase is a backend as a service. Firebase is a product of Google, and it provides you many different functionalities, which we're going to look at the next lecture. But there are other backend as a service. Some are called backendless. There is other called Realm Mobile Platform. Each of these services come with their own advantages and disadvantages. I think Firebase is very easy to set up. And in the next lecture, I'm going to show you that what kind of features Firebase provides you that you can integrate with your application, and what is the pricing structure if you have to use Firebase for your production application.